Thank you.
I will undertake no more idle seeking. Today our life is going to get a little bit easier. Today we're going to continue with Workbook Lesson 86. And the Circle of Atonement group put up this little picture. It says, I will undertake no more idle seeking. Today's lesson is a summary of lessons 71 and 72. Dad, do you want to read this part for me?
You're muted. Bob, you're muted.
Okay, this will sound much better. All right. These ideas are for review today. Review of Lesson 71. Only God's plan for salvation will work. It is senseless for me to search wildly about for salvation. I have seen egoic salvation in many people and in many things, but when I reached for true salvation, it wasn't there. My ego was mistaken about where true salvation is. My ego was mistaken about what true salvation is. I will undertake no more idle seeking by following my ego's plan for my salvation. Only God's plan for salvation will work for me. Only God's plan for salvation will work. And I will rejoice because God's plan can never fail. These are some suggested forms for applying this idea that only God's plan for salvation will work to some specific applications. God's plan for salvation will save me from my perception of this, whatever's going on. Or, this is no exception in God's plan for my salvation. Or, let me perceive this only in the light of God's plan for salvation. Moving forward, review of Lesson 72. Holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. Holding grievances is an attempt to prove that God's plan for salvation will not work. Yet only God's plan will work. By holding grievances, I am therefore excluding my only hope of salvation from my awareness that only God's plan will work. I would no longer defeat my own best interests in this insane way by holding grievances. I would accept God's plan for salvation and be happy. Specific applications for this idea that holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation might be in these forms. Okay, something goes wrong, and the response inside us is, I am choosing between misperception and salvation as I look on this. Either I don't understand what's going on at all, or I want salvation. If I see grounds for grievances in this, I will not see the grounds for my salvation. And the most important one of all, this calls for salvation, not attack. And those are the notes, Lee. Actually, those are the reading of it. I'll be very happy to comment on this for a little while.
That's okay. Let me do our meditation, and then
Okay.
I'll find some notes, and then definitely we'll have plenty of time for comment for sure. All right. Let's take a deep... Go ahead, Papa.
This one's juicy. That's all I was trying to say.
Yeah, I hear you, man. No problem. So let's take a deep breath. Connect with the ground beneath us, wherever your body is touching a surface that connects you down to the earth, that connects us all. Take a deep breath. Remember this light inside of you. This beautiful white light inside of you. The light of love, the light of peace. Take a deep breath and imagine that light spreading out from your chest, brighter and brighter, connecting with the other lights in the world, all of your brothers and sisters, focusing on how only God's plan for salvation will work. All your brothers and sisters, the lights of the world, focusing on holding grievances as an attack on God's plan for salvation. Let's not do that. Today, we want to seat these lessons inside of us deeply, so we can learn the lessons and never have to learn them again. Once we learn this way and keep it clear, this path does not hold for us in our old state of mind. Only God's plan for salvation will work. Can drive your ego crazy. Only the ego holds grievances. So you've got to fully commit. Today, like other days where I searched wildly around for salvation, I just needed to realize it was in me all along. When I reached for true salvation, it seemed like it wasn't there. My ego was mistaken because it doesn't know. Its job is to keep us questioning, not to answer. So when I remember that only God's plan for salvation will work, it will bring me joy. And I'll rejoice because His plan can never fail. So wherever you happen to be, remember God's plan for salvation will save you in that situation. There's no exception in God's plan for my salvation. Any given problem can be perceived only in the light of God's plan for salvation. Remember, holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. By holding grievances, I'm excluding my only hope of salvation from my awareness. My awareness is like a light I shine from a flashlight or a torch. It lights up just an area. My awareness, guided by my ego frequency, looks in an area where the solution isn't. You need to shine that flashlight inside of you so that you no longer defeat your own best interests in that insane way the ego would have you do. I would accept God's plan for salvation and be happy. And I've got another 3 sentences to apply to things when you run into them and you have grievances. You can say, I'm choosing between misperception and salvation as I look on this. If I see grounds for grievances in this, I will not see the grounds for my salvation. This calls for salvation, not attack. Today, in these review lessons, try and find a time later on today to reread number 72, because lesson 86 is reviewing 71 and 72, and holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. That's 72. We want to focus on that again tonight so that we get 2 good lessons in today. But the whole day long, you can combine these 2. Only God's plan for salvation will work. Holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. To be reminded that it's only the grievances I'm holding on to that are blocking my awareness. And they are not worth it. They are not worth it. Would you really want to hold on to something that keeps you from everlasting joy? Happily forgive, happily release, joyfully disengage. Let grievances be for someone else. Today, you're on cloud 9. Nothing can touch you. Safe and sound. And so it is. Let's take a couple of deep breaths, stretch our backs out a little bit, get ready for our day, stretch my spine out a little bit. I hope you all are doing well. My dad had adventures on the way to Liberia, and he's in DC. We'll hear that story. We've got traveling going on all around. It's a happy Sunday. I hope you guys are feeling great. I'm so grateful you're here with me. We read through our lesson. We'll set some reminders for us for later on in the day. Let's talk about this. 86 is good. This is right in the middle of the review, almost to the point where we're ready to get on into the next section. So this is a great time to seat ourselves back into our spirituality, recommit for the day. Have a fantastic day, my friends.
Well, this lesson says only God's plan for salvation will work, but it says practically like everything is God's plan salvation. I mean, it's not like you don't know what is God's plan for salvation. It's that you need to understand that everything that is happening is God's plan, not yours, right? Everything that is going on right
Yep.
now. Yeah.
What do you think, Papa?
I have a lot of thoughts about this. So I'll share some of them. I, like some people, have been searching for something, but I didn't know what it was for a very long time. Coming up in the Jewish religion in my earlier years, we didn't even have any concept that I can recall of salvation, of getting a whole different new view of why things are the way they are. It was just a sense of study more, the tractates and the many different books that have come down through the ages, starting from oral traditions of 600 BC, all about the Jewish religion. And there wasn't any sense of an alternative change, of any reason to change, because we were told that we were the chosen. And it's quite a different mindset. It may just be what most people have anyway, until they get into what is this thing called salvation. And when I began to, I think the thing that triggered it, and I said this, I remembered it a few weeks ago, the thing that triggered my really looking in earnest for some different thing, different way, was, I believe it was back in the 70s, believe it or not, there was a movement which took on a lot of buttons, like the kind that you have for political conventions and stuff. And it only said, "I found it." And they had T-shirts, "I found it." And they had placards up, "I found it." And I just kept wondering, what the hell are they finding? What is this it? And I really didn't know. And then eventually it made sense that they were looking for the Holy Spirit within them. They were looking for salvation. I remember using it as a joke. I found it, somebody says, and I said, "Oh, I didn't know I lost it. Thank you," or whatever. And we just made jokes about it. It turns out to be an incredibly holy and wondrous thing, because all you have to do is get rid of your grievances and your fear goes away. That's an interesting thing. It's something that we have to do, get rid of grievances or let them go and stop harboring them, investigate them, let them go, and then fear of the future and the present goes away. Two different things happening here, but one helps bring the other. But it's also important to try and understand where this help is coming from. What is this it? What is this thing that's going to change these things? At that point, it becomes potentially an all-consuming thing. And with complete involvement of our every thought, every emotion, every action, the things we do, the things we don't do, how we treat people, all of these things change. In the beginning, maybe it's a direction or a directive. Do this, don't do that. Kind of like the Ten Commandments, which came down a long time ago. But it's so much more than that. I don't think there's any commandment that I can think of that says, don't hold grievances. And yet it's profoundly important to ever have any peace of mind. As long as our focus is out there at someone that we have a grievance against, I hate that person. I hate that political party. I hate the way they dress. I hate the way I dress. I hate anything that shows a lack on my part to show to anyone. That's clearly ego. All of these grievances, and there are so many, are what keep me from having fun and enjoying life and not worrying about the future. Yesterday, I had my tickets. I was on my way. I got to these, well, when I got to the local airport in Raleigh-Durham, they said, you can't go. And I said, what do you mean I can't go? And they said, well, your documents aren't right. You're missing the test. And I had spent hours working on all the documents that we had to upload. It wasn't like just a normal kind of flight, which for the most part is what I've been taking for many years. This was not only overseas, but into Liberia. And it turns out that to have the COVID shots or even the booster shot, apparently the booster shot too long ago, even though it was about 7 months ago. And what they needed to see was the two different kinds. If I had a problem with COVID, but I only had taken one. I didn't understand clearly that they needed to have both. One wasn't enough. So I worked with the people at RDU for 2 hours, the 2 hours that I got there early, and I finally got the computer to say, okay, he's ready to go. Well, that was a misperception, as it says right here in the reading we have today. It still wasn't, but I got on the air and I flew to DC, Washington, DC. And luckily, right to the desk or the gate where I was supposed to leave. And I said, look okay? They looked at it and said, nope, you're missing a test. I said, well, we are down in Raleigh. Well, I'm sorry, but fly here to DC, but it's not going to be okay for you to come to Liberia. And when you get to Brussels, they're going to tell you so. So I said, well, what can I do? So they told me to go see the information desk. I went to the information desk, fortunately on one of those back cars, because it probably would have taken 20 minutes to walk it, assuming I even knew the way. And they said, yep, you got a problem. Here's the fix. And they fixed it, supposedly. And that took about a half hour. And I went back to the gate in the electric car. When I got to the electric car, when I got to the gate, they so they sent me back in the electric car to the. Oh yeah, I had a great time. This was amazing. So they sent me all the way back to the other place, and they said, "Yep, you have a problem." So he worked on it, and then they called in the manager, Mr. United himself, and he said, "You have a problem." And so they tried to work it through. But since I had tried to get the cheapest flight that I could get, and this was United, they had a problem with the fact that if they reroute me, it's going to change things. They possibly rerouted me, but that wasn't going to work either. Long story longer, it all ended up that they said, "Oh, you're not going anywhere. You're going to stay at the Hilton Hotel." Okay, that's nice. "And tomorrow you're going to take the test in the morning at the airport." You come back to the airport, and by the time 6:00 p.m. comes along, you'll have the results of the test, and if they are negative, then you'll be able to go to Liberia. So I went through all of this. I spent most of the day going back and forth between the original gate at RDU, Raleigh-Durham, and then with the folks at Washington, D.C. But a couple of interesting things happened. I began to see this could turn out bad, and then I thought about the thing we're talking about today, salvation, and I thought, this is not going to turn out bad. In some way, it's going to be even better than it would have been. And I started looking for those kinds of responses. And just about that time, there was a man standing at the gate to Liberia, ostensibly, eventually to Liberia. He was black. He was dressed in a nice suit. And he said, "What's the matter?" And I explained the problem I was dealing with. And he turned out to be the regional vice chairman of the Unity Party in Liberia that's going to be running for elections next year. And we talked for a while, and he gave me his card. He gave me his phone number, his Liberian phone number. The card has the American phone number. And he is a big muckamuck. He's actually going to be able to help us in our work that we're going to be doing. That was one thing that turned out to be good. I sent his name to my contact in Liberia, and all he said was, "Wow, good one, Bob." The other thing that was very funny is that this one guy that took me the first time in the electronic thing all the way one way and then all the way back, every time I had to go back and forth, there was someone else driving another vehicle, but I would pass him. And he would look at me and says, "What are you doing?" And he slowed down, and we had this little conversation. And then I'd go on. And then when I came back, we passed again. And he kept wondering, what's going on? The final time was really funniest of all, because I was beyond either one of those on my way to the gate to get a bus to the Hilton. And now he just saw me walking. I wasn't even on an electronic bus. And he just looked at me with the most puzzled look. And when all was said and done, I just really am not worried. I had a nice room in the Hilton. This hotel is a complete donut. It's a big circle. Every room is part of it's a section, because when you look at a corridor, you don't see 200 feet down the corridor. All you see is as far as the curve. And it makes it seem, as you walk, like a smaller walk. It really is very nice. I've always known that as an architectural trick, but I've never been in one. So it really was cool. So that is how changing our perception and understanding, finally, that it was a misunderstanding. It was the tests they were looking for, not whether or not I got a shot or not. Because let's face it, you can take a shot. Doesn't matter. You could still get it. I mean, you could. But the test says you don't have it. That's what they wanted, and now I understand it. So I'm free today to do the right thing.
You get a few hours of more sleep. I mean, You didn't have to take the long trip, right?
Right. And this time, instead of going way up to Brussels and then way back down, I'm going to go across to Ghana and then just go up a small trip. So the only real overnight is one night. And yeah, so there are little things built in. I'll probably find out more. And that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. Not me, is it?
No,
No.
no, no. I'm sorry.
Nope, that's me.
No, honey. And I was trying to mute the microphone, and I moved to the audience. Badly. I'm so sorry.
Morning.
Morning, Andy.
Hello, Andy. You got your other face on again.
Yep. And I just wanted to mention a couple things real quick, and because I know Tom wants to speak as well. I came in late, so I didn't hear the lesson, but it's nonetheless, did it ever penetrate, where it needed to? and what was funny is that I heard a few things. I heard the meditation, and then I heard Bob speak about something about. Well, anyway, you'll know what it is probably when I say something similar. About how so I was thinking how we have to do this lesson, and often we do this, this program over and over and over. And then I was thinking, well, the reason for that is because our ego is basically interwoven through and through every memory almost. Well, maybe all of them, maybe even all of them. And so if we're using memory to for hold on, it's since I believe, no, this is me, that memory is serving me at every given moment. It would be understood that the ego, we're not dissecting everything we say before we say it. And that we could do. It does make me speak slower when I try to do that. But it's really daunting. It's actually really daunting task. And maybe I can get used to it or what have you. But there's a man, Bruce Lipton. Many of you probably heard of him. And he spoke, I took a course from him actually. And it came down to basically that visualization, self-hypnosis, affirmations are really the most effective on a quicker level, I guess, to making change. And I believe for me that is very true. I also believe that I have to understand first, what am I doing and why am I making the change? Like, what is it that or even have had an understanding, and then the ability to make the change would happen. But without an understanding, it doesn't. So to understand each lesson is possibly why it's because it's not fully understood, and why it would take many times possibly. So what I was thinking was that I'd like to offer some things that I know in a separate room to anyone, in a private room to anyone like a group of us, if anyone would be interested in perhaps learning self-hypnosis and the technique, and how to apply each one of these, and have once they learn, it's fairly simple, this method that I use. And I just thought, because also what made me think about it is that Lee does a beautiful job walking us through the guided meditation, but there's a few trigger words that we don't want to put in to the meditation. Yeah, so I was thinking I could either talk to Lee about it and help him with if he wants. I don't know if he has time. I know he's probably super busy.
No, you know what I can do? I have Adriana too. So together we kind of do this, but I definitely want to get better at that part. So I'm in.
Because I think that, or everyone that's interested could just come into a private room at, when we all choose, and I can tell you there's some questions for your that we ask ourselves. We don't even have to share all of it. We can just write them. Writing is self-hypnosis, but I could teach you with those techniques. They're pretty simple and straightforward. I just thought I'd offer that because it would help to integrate them. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Tom, for your patience.
I wanted to, if I could, can you hear me? I just want to make sure I'm.
Yep,
Yes,
we can hear you.
Oh, okay, all right. But Bob gave a interesting story, and it kind of relates to the lesson of the day, obviously. And Jana had mentioned the idea that everything is God's plan. Uh, we're all on our own perfect path, so everything that unfolds is exactly where we need to be, and it becomes a question of how we're going to deal with uh, the events and circumstances that are in our individuated consciousness at that given moment. And grace is the ability to see the love of God in a world of seeming hate and fear. And grace is always available if we're open to accept that. Um, so when the world's circumstances unfold before our eyes, we have a choice as to how we wish to view that. If we want to view it as a learning opportunity, if we want to just view it in from a fear-based idea that well, we're here with a life and death struggle. So in the circumstances that Bob saw himself in yesterday, uh, he had the ability to choose as to how he wanted to respond to those circumstances. He could move into fear, or he could move into acceptance. And it's interesting the choices that we have when we uh, wish to argue for our rightness and try and find where we can lay blame or guilt or shame on others or ourselves. That really doesn't serve us. That's a grievance that we're actually holding against ourselves or others, and that ties up our energy into trying to deal with not the problem at hand, but with the past, trying to figure out how we got into that problem. And at the present moment, that's not what we want to focus on. We want to focus on getting the problem resolved. And trying to lay blame, shame, or guilt doesn't help us. So the question in that is, okay, we've got a problem. How can we move beyond that problem as opposed to who can we blame about it? So it's interesting that, you know, the focus was on solving the problem. And in Bob's case, throughout the day, anyways, he had a choice to accept the plan and kind of go with the flow and be in the present moment and decide how you're going to correct the situation so that you can ultimately get where the results that you want, otherwise get to Liberia, as opposed to wallowing in things that he can't do, which is the past, and trying to figure out why he's in that situation, what blame. When we're in a situation, we need to address the problem. So that's what he did, and he basically saw the I'm going to say love of God in a world of seeming hate and fear, and he went with the flow. And in this case, he met somebody that may very well prove to be very helpful in the overall quest of what he's trying to do. And he tried to maintain his peace as opposed to slipping into fear and trying to project out either on others or himself some blame, shame, or guilt for the situation that he was in. So it's interesting, whenever they say uh, holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. Whenever we hold a grievance, we're basically saying that God's plan, otherwise what unfolded before us, instead of being the perfect lesson, there was something wrong with it, and somebody, whether it's us, others, or God, screwed up. And it's that coloring of the event that uh, creates the problem and prevents us from seeing the love of God in a world of seeming hate and fear. We take this circumstance seriously, think that there's some